Commander Zephyr's 3 hearts beat rapidly as she watched the final defense grid collapse on her tactical display. The crimson indicators spread across the hologram like a plague, each one representing another fallen position on the fortress world of Cathari Prime. Her elongated fingers gripped the command console until her knuckles turned pale blue. "Ma'am, the eastern perimeter has been breached," reported Lieutenant Vax, his antenna twitching with nervous energy. "The Ravager swarms are pouring through Sector 7. Our casualties are mounting exponentially." Zephyr closed her large dark eyes for a moment. The Cathari Defense Force had held this world for over 3 centuries, but the Ravagers had brought something new this time. These weren't the mindless insectoid drones they'd faced before. These creatures showed tactical awareness, coordination, and worst of all, they seemed to be learning from each engagement. "How many functional battalions do we have left?" she asked, though she already dreaded the answer. 17% combat effective, Commander. Maybe less if the Western Front collapses in the next hour." The bridge of the orbital command station shuddered as another wave of enemy fire struck their shields. Through the transparent aluminum viewports, Zephyr could see the planet's surface burning. Cities that had stood for millennia were now nothing but glowing craters. Billions of her people had already been evacuated to the inner systems, but the military personnel defending the retreat routes were trapped. "Incoming transmission from the Galactic Defense Council," announced Communications Officer Trill. "It's Admiral Nexus himself." The main screen flickered to life, revealing the stern face of Admiral Nexus, Supreme Commander of the Allied Forces. His scaled features showed the strain of coordinating defenses across 12 star systems simultaneously. "Commander Zephyr," his voice carried the weight of desperate authority. "I've reviewed your situation reports. Cathari Prime cannot fall. If the Ravagers establish a foothold in your system, they'll have a direct route to the core worlds." "Understood, Admiral. But we need reinforcements immediately. My forces can't hold much longer against these new variants. I'm dispatching everything available. The Altarian fleet is 3 days out, and the Centauri battle group can reach you in 5 days." Zephyr's primary heart sank.
"Admiral, with respect, we don't have 5 days.
"At current casualty rates, we'll be overrun within 18 hours. The Admiral's expression darkened. "Then hold for 18 hours and hope the reinforcements arrive early." He paused, seeming to wrestle with something. "There is one other option. The humans have offered assistance." A collective gasp rippled across the bridge. Even in their desperate situation, the mention of humans sent a chill through the crew. Everyone in the galaxy had heard the stories. The young species that had emerged from a death world so hostile that it had forged them into something unrecognizable. They called themselves peaceful, but their very existence was a contradiction to everything the galaxy understood about evolution. "Admiral," Zephyr said carefully, "the humans are still considered a provisional member species. Their military capabilities are unproven in large-scale conflicts. Commander, you asked for reinforcements. The humans are what's available. They claim they can reach your position within 6 hours. 6 hours. It seemed impossible. The nearest human territory was at least 12 hours away, even at maximum hyperdrive speeds. Either the humans were lying about their capabilities, or they possessed technology that the rest of the galaxy didn't understand. "What are they offering to send?" she asked. They were vague about specifics, something called a rapid response unit. They assured me it would be sufficient. Another explosion rocked the station. On the tactical display, 3 more defense positions winked out of existence. Time was running out faster than anticipated. "Ma'am," Lieutenant Vax's voice cracked with urgency. "The Ravagers have broken through the northern quadrant. They're heading straight for the civilian evacuation centers." Zephyr made her decision. "Admiral, we accept the human offer. Transmit our tactical frequencies and current deployment patterns." "Understood. The humans are already en route. Their estimated arrival is, they say 20 minutes. 20 minutes? Zephyr couldn't hide her shock. "From where?" They wouldn't say. "Admiral Nexus out." The transmission ended, leaving the bridge in stunned silence. 20 minutes from anywhere was impossible, unless the humans had somehow positioned forces in their system without anyone noticing. The thought sent a chill down Zephyr's spine. "All stations prepare for friendly reinforcements," she announced. "Unknown human configuration, arrival in 20 minutes. As if summoned by her words, the sensor operator called out, "Commander, I'm detecting massive hyperspace distortions at the edge of the system. Something big is coming through." "How big?" Zephyr asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know. The energy signatures are unprecedented. Whatever's coming, it's larger than anything in our databases. 15 minutes passed in tense silence, broken only by status reports from the surface. The Ravagers had accelerated their assault, as if they too sensed something approaching. The alien creatures were many things, but they weren't stupid. If they were rushing to finish their conquest, they knew something was coming. "Commander?" The sensor operator's voice was barely above a whisper. "You need to see this." The main display switched to long-range sensors. At first, Zephyr thought there was a malfunction. The reading showed something impossible, a structure the size of a small moon dropping out of hyperspace. "That can't be right," she murmured. "I've run 3 diagnostics, ma'am. The readings are accurate. And there's more." The display zoomed out, revealing not one but dozens of massive contacts. They emerged from hyperspace in perfect formation, their combined mass rivaling that of an asteroid field. "What are we looking at?" Zephyr asked. Before anyone could answer, her communications console chimed with an incoming transmission. The voice that emerged was distinctly human, calm, professional, and terrifyingly confident. "Cathari Defense Force. This is Admiral Sarah Chen of the Human Expeditionary Fleet. We received your request for assistance. Please stand by while we assess the situation." The largest contact on the display began moving toward the planet with impossible speed. As it approached, the ship's true scale became apparent. It wasn't just larger than anything the Cathari had built. It was larger than anything they had imagined possible. "Admiral Chen," Zephyr managed to say. "Exactly what kind of reinforcements are you bringing?" There was a pause, then what sounded almost like amusement in the human's voice. "The kind you asked for, Commander. Now, if you could please pull your remaining forces back to minimum safe distance, we'll take care of your Ravager problem." As Zephyr watched the impossible human fleet take positions around her world, she realized that the galaxy was about to learn exactly what humanity meant by sufficient. Commander Zephyr stared at the tactical display in disbelief. The human fleet hadn't just arrived. They had materialized around Cathari Prime like they'd been there all along. Her sensors struggled to process the sheer scale of what she was witnessing. The largest vessel dwarfed her orbital command station by a factor of 50. "Admiral Chen," Zephyr transmitted, "our sensors indicate your flagship is nearly 30 kilometers long. How is such a structure even possible?" "Engineering is one of humanity's strengths, Commander," came the calm reply. "The UES Determination has been our mobile command base for deep space operations. She's seen action in 17 different galaxies. 17 galaxies. The words hit Zephyr like a physical blow. The Cathari had barely explored their own galactic arm, and here were humans casually mentioning conflicts across multiple galaxies. "Ma'am?" Lieutenant Vax's voice trembled as he reported. "I'm reading energy signatures from the human vessels that are off the charts. Their smallest frigates are outputting more power than our entire defense fleet combined." On the surface of Cathari Prime, the Ravager swarms had paused their advance. Even the alien creatures seemed to sense the change in the balance of power. Through the orbital sensors, Zephyr could see the insectoid aliens regrouping, their bioships rising from the planet's surface to face this new threat. "Commander," Admiral Chen's voice carried a note of professional courtesy, "we're going to need your forces to maintain a minimum distance of 500 kilometers from the planetary surface. What we're about to deploy tends to be rather energetic. Admiral, with respect, 500 kilometers will put us outside effective support range. If your plan fails, we won't be able to provide backup." There was a pause, then something that might have been gentle amusement in the human's voice. "Commander, if our plan fails, backup won't matter. Trust me on this one." Reluctantly, Zephyr ordered her remaining ships to pull back to the designated distance. As they retreated, she watched the Ravager bioships converge on the human fleet. There were thousands of them, living vessels the size of skyscrapers, their chitinous hulls pulsing with bioluminescent patterns that spoke of alien intelligence and malevolent purpose. The first wave of Ravagers opened fire simultaneously. Energy beams that had carved through Cathari shields like paper struck the human vessels. Zephyr held her breath, expecting to see the impossible human ships finally take damage. Nothing happened. The energy beams simply vanished against the human hulls, absorbed without so much as a flicker of their shield systems. "Interesting," Admiral Chen commented conversationally. "Directed energy weapons using a bioneural targeting system. Efficient but ultimately limited by organic computational speeds. Limited by what? Zephyr whispered to herself. The human response was swift and decisive. The smallest human vessel, a ship the Admiral had casually referred to as a frigate, moved toward the largest concentration of Ravager bioships. As it approached, sections of its hull began to reconfigure themselves, armor plates sliding apart to reveal weapon systems that defied classification. What emerged wasn't energy beams or projectile weapons. Instead, the space around the Ravager formation began to change. Reality seemed to fold inward, creating impossible geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly. "What are they doing?" Lieutenant Vax asked, his voice filled with awe and terror. Before anyone could answer, the space occupied by 3,000 Ravager bioships simply ceased to exist. Not destroyed, not vaporized, gone as if they had never been there at all. Where the alien fleet had been, there was now perfectly empty space, not even debris remaining. Zephyr's bridge fell silent except for the quiet hum of life support systems. In 30 seconds, a single human frigate had eliminated more Ravagers than the entire Cathari Defense Force had managed in 6 months of warfare. "My apologies for the delay." "Commander?" Admiral Chen's voice broke the stunned silence. "We had to verify that our weapons wouldn't damage your planet's ecosystem. Humans take environmental protection very seriously. Environmental protection. They had just erased 3,000 enemy vessels from existence and were worried about disturbing the local wildlife." "Admiral," Zephyr managed to say, "what did you do to them?" "Temporal displacement," came the matter-of-fact reply. "We moved them approximately 14 billion years into the future. They'll arrive just as the universe reaches maximum entropy. Perfectly humane. They won't suffer, and they can't threaten anyone else." Temporal displacement. The humans were manipulating time itself as a weapon. Zephyr felt her worldview crumbling around her. The Galactic Council had always assumed that advanced civilizations would develop along similar paths: better energy weapons, stronger shields, faster ships. No one had imagined a species that treated the fundamental forces of the universe as tools. On the planet's surface, the remaining Ravager forces had noticed the disappearance of their orbital support. The ground-based swarms were adapting quickly, burrowing into the planet's crust to avoid whatever fate had befallen their space-based kin. "They're trying to go underground," Zephyr reported. "Our orbital bombardment systems can't penetrate that deep without causing massive ecological damage." "Understood," Admiral Chen replied. "Deploying ground pacification units." The human flagship's hangar bays opened, and Zephyr watched in fascination as thousands of small craft emerged. At first she thought they were fighters or assault shuttles, but as they approached the planet, their true nature became apparent. They were individual soldiers. Humans in powered armor, crossing the vacuum of space under their own power, moving at speeds that should have liquefied any organic being. "Admiral, are those your troops? In open space?" "Standard deployment protocol for terrestrial pacification," Admiral Chen confirmed. "Each suit is equipped with its own gravity manipulation system, temporal shielding, and reality anchors. The Ravagers won't know what hit them." As the human soldiers reached the planet's surface, they didn't slow down. Instead, they dove directly into the ground, passing through solid rock as if it were water. Seconds later, seismic sensors detected massive disturbances deep within the planet's crust. "How are they moving through solid matter?" Lieutenant Vax asked, his scientific training warring with what his sensors were telling him. "Phase shifting," came Admiral Chen's explanation. "By adjusting their molecular resonance frequencies, our soldiers can become intangible to normal matter, while maintaining their ability to interact with Ravager biomaterial. It's a standard feature of Mark 7 combat armor." Mark 7, which implied there had been at least 6 previous generations of this impossible technology. Within minutes, the seismic disturbances stopped. The thermal readings that had indicated massive Ravager underground colonies simply vanished. The human soldiers began emerging from the planet's surface, their armor unmarked despite having just waged war in conditions that should have been lethal. "Pacification complete," one of the soldiers reported. "No remaining hostile biosignatures detected. Planet secured for civilian return." Secured for civilian return. The humans had eliminated an invasion force that had taken the Cathari 6 months to barely contain, and they were already thinking about the refugees coming home. "Commander," Admiral Chen addressed Zephyr directly. Your people are safe. We've also taken the liberty of repairing the damage to your cities and infrastructure. Our fabrication systems work quite quickly. On her display, Zephyr watched in amazement as the burned-out husks of her world's great cities began to rebuild themselves. Structures rose from nothing, perfect copies of what had been destroyed, completing in minutes what would have taken her people decades to accomplish. Admiral, Zephyr said slowly, who exactly are you people? There was a pause, and when Admiral Chen spoke again, her voice carried a weight that seemed to encompass eons. We're humans, Commander. We're what happens when a species refuses to accept that anything is impossible. 3 hours after the last Ravager had been eliminated, Commander Zephyr found herself aboard the human flagship, walking through corridors that challenged everything she thought she knew about physics. The walls themselves seemed alive, shifting and adapting to accommodate her alien physiology. When she had mentioned that the standard human atmosphere was too oxygen-rich for her species, the ship had simply adjusted the local environment around her. Admiral Sarah Chen met her in what the humans called an observation lounge. Through the transparent walls, Zephyr could see Cathari Prime rotating peacefully below, its cities gleaming as if they had never been touched by war. The impossible nature of the human reconstruction was still sinking in. Your fabrication technology, Zephyr began, settling into a chair that molded itself to her form. It didn't just rebuild our cities. The materials, the architectural details, they're identical to the originals down to the molecular level. Admiral Chen smiled, an expression that somehow managed to be both reassuring and terrifying. We have extensive databases of most galactic civilizations. Cultural preservation is important to us. Most civilizations? How many species have you encountered? Active contact with approximately 47,000 sentient species across local galactic cluster. Passive observation of several million more. Chen spoke as casually as if she were discussing the weather. Humanity has been exploring for quite some time. 47,000. The Galactic Council represented barely 300 species, and they considered themselves the pinnacle of interstellar civilization. How long exactly has humanity been spacefaring? Zephyr asked, though she was beginning to suspect the answer would be disturbing. Depends on how you define it. We achieved faster-than-light travel about 50,000 years ago, but we've been what you might call seriously exploring for approximately 20,000 years. The casual mention of such vast timescales made Zephyr's head spin. Human records suggested they had only recently emerged from their homeworld. Either those records were deliberately falsified, or humanity had been playing a much longer game than anyone realized. But your species only made contact with the Galactic Council 50 years ago. You requested provisional membership status. We did. Admiral Chen's smile became mysterious. Sometimes it's useful to appear less capable than you actually are. It allows you to observe how others behave when they think they have an advantage. A test. The humans had been testing the galaxy's response to a seemingly weak new species. Zephyr felt a chill as she realized the implications. Every interaction, every diplomatic exchange, every moment of condescension from established species, the humans had been watching and evaluating. Why reveal your true capabilities now? She asked. Because the Ravagers represent something new. They're not from this galaxy, Commander. They're refugees from somewhere else. Something that forced them to flee their home reality. And if something could chase the Ravagers from their origin point, it's going to be a threat worth taking seriously. Origin point. The humans spoke of other realities as casually as other species discussed neighboring star systems. A soft chime indicated an incoming communication. Admiral Chen touched a control surface that materialized from thin air, and a holographic display showed the concerned face of Admiral Nexus. Admiral Chen, I've received reports from Commander Zephyr's forces. They claim you eliminated the entire Ravager presence in under 4 hours. Is this accurate? Yes, Admiral. Cathari Prime is secure. We've also repaired the infrastructure damage and established a monitoring grid to detect any future incursions. Admiral Nexus's scaled features showed a mixture of relief and confusion. How many ships did you lose in the engagement? None. Casualties? None. But the Ravagers had over 50,000 bioships in that system. Our projections suggested that even with reinforcements, we'd lose at least 60% of our forces driving them out. Admiral Chen exchanged a look with Zephyr before responding. Admiral, I think it's time for a broader conversation about humanity's role in galactic defense. We've been operating under certain assumptions that may need revision. On the holographic display, Admiral Nexus leaned forward. What kind of assumptions? That the galaxy's current defense strategies are adequate for emerging threats. They're not. Chen's voice carried absolute certainty. The Ravagers are just the beginning. What's coming next will make them look like a minor inconvenience. You know what's coming? We've seen this pattern before in other galaxies. Reality incursions typically follow a specific escalation sequence. First come the scouts, that's what the Ravagers were. Next will be the advance hunters, then the reality shapers, and finally the convergence entities. Zephyr felt her blood turn cold. Reality shapers? Beings that can rewrite the fundamental laws of physics in localized areas. They'll make space itself hostile to normal matter. The convergence entities are worse. They exist to collapse dimensional barriers and merge realities into something unrecognizable. Admiral Nexus was silent for a long moment. How do we fight something like that? With weapons that operate outside the current understanding of physics. With soldiers who can survive in non-causal environments. With ships that can navigate paradox zones and maintain coherent existence while reality shifts around them. And humanity possesses these capabilities? We've been preparing for this specific threat for 12,000 years. The Ravagers' arrival was the trigger we've been waiting for. 12,000 years of preparation. While other species had been developing incrementally better technologies, humanity had been preparing for a war against the fundamental nature of reality itself. Admiral Nexus, Chen continued, I'm transmitting a proposal for a new defense protocol. I recommend you share it with the Galactic Council immediately. The holographic display flickered as data streams transferred. Admiral Nexus's expression grew increasingly grave as he reviewed the information. These defensive requirements. Most Council species couldn't implement even the basic protocols. The energy requirements alone would exceed their entire planetary output, which is why humanity will be taking primary responsibility for galactic defense. We'll coordinate with existing forces where possible, but the heavy lifting will need to be done by us. You're proposing to defend the entire galaxy single-handedly? Not just this galaxy, Chen corrected. The local cluster. 12 galaxies total. Approximately 400 billion star systems. If we let the incursions establish footholds anywhere, they'll spread exponentially. The scope of what the humans were proposing was beyond anything Zephyr had imagined possible. Defending one galaxy was challenging enough for the combined forces of hundreds of species. The humans were casually discussing protecting 12 galaxies as a matter of routine. What do you need from us? Admiral Nexus asked quietly. Coordinate the evacuation protocols we're transmitting. When the reality shapers arrive, normal space within 50 light-years of their entry points will become uninhabitable for baseline matter. We'll need to relocate approximately 40 billion civilians to safe zones. 40 billion civilians. The number was so large it was almost abstract. But these were people, entire civilizations that would need to be moved to safety. How long do we have? Zephyr asked. Best estimate is 6 months before the next phase begins. The advance hunters will probe our defenses first. If they find us adequately prepared, they might withdraw and try elsewhere. If not, they'll summon the reality shapers, Admiral Nexus finished grimly. Exactly. Which is why it's important that our response to their probes be sufficiently overwhelming. We need to convince them that this galaxy is too well defended to be worth the effort. Admiral Nexus nodded slowly. I'll convene an emergency session of the Council. What should I tell them about humanity's true capabilities? Admiral Chen smiled, and for the first time, Zephyr glimpsed something genuinely frightening behind her calm demeanor. Tell them that they asked for reinforcements, and what arrived was the answer to threats they didn't even know existed. The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened within 18 hours, faster than any gathering in the organization's 1,000-year history. Representatives from 300 species filled the vast amphitheater on the neutral world of Concordia, their varied forms creating a symphony of alien architecture as they took their designated positions. Commander Zephyr stood beside Admiral Nexus at the central podium, still processing everything she had witnessed aboard the human flagship. The weight of what she was about to reveal to the galaxy's leadership felt crushing. How do you tell the most powerful beings in known space that everything they thought they knew was wrong? Fellow council members, Admiral Nexus began, his voice amplified by the chamber's acoustic systems. We face an unprecedented situation. The recent Ravager incursion was resolved by human intervention in a manner that defies our current understanding of military capabilities. A murmur rippled through the assembled delegates. The Thrakari ambassador, an insectoid being whose species had fought the Ravagers for centuries, clicked his mandibles in what Zephyr recognized as skepticism. Admiral Nexus, the Thrakari spoke. With respect, the humans are a provisional member species. Their technology is interesting but primitive by our standards. How could they succeed where our combined fleets have struggled? Commander Zephyr will present her first-hand observations, Admiral Nexus replied. Stepping aside, Zephyr activated the holographic display system, showing tactical recordings from the Cathari Prime engagement. The assembled delegates watched in growing amazement as 30 kilometers of human warship materialized from hyperspace. The human flagship alone massed more than our entire orbital defense network, she began. Their smallest vessels generated power signatures exceeding anything in our databases. On the display, the moment of the Ravager's disappearance played out. 3,000 bioships simply ceased to exist, leaving not even debris behind. Impossible, breathed the Crystalline Collective's representative, her silicon-based form resonating with harmonics of disbelief. Matter cannot simply vanish. Conservation of mass energy is a fundamental law. According to Admiral Chen, they used temporal displacement. The Ravager fleet was moved 14 billion years into the future. The chamber erupted in chaos. Delegates from dozens of species spoke simultaneously in their native languages, creating a cacophony of alarm and disbelief. The Altarian ambassador, whose species were considered the galaxy's foremost temporal theorists, rose from his crystalline perch. Time manipulation on that scale would require energy equivalent to a stellar collapse. The gravitational distortions alone would have destroyed every planet in the system. And yet Cathari Prime was completely undamaged, Zephyr replied. Furthermore, the humans rebuilt our destroyed cities in perfect detail within hours. She showed recordings of the reconstruction process, buildings rising from nothing, each one an exact replica of what had been lost. The silence that followed was more disturbing than the earlier chaos. The Valdorian Supreme Counselor, eldest and most respected member of the Assembly, spoke with a voice that carried millennia of authority. Commander Zephyr, you are suggesting that this young species possesses technology thousands of years beyond our own. This contradicts every assessment we have made of human capabilities. With respect, Supreme Counselor, I believe that was intentional. Admiral Chen informed me that humanity has been observing us, evaluating our responses to what they perceived as a weak new species. The implications hit the Assembly like a shockwave. If the humans had been deliberately appearing primitive while possessing godlike technology, what did that say about every interaction they'd had with galactic civilization? Admiral Nexus stepped forward again. The humans have revealed their capabilities because they claim the Ravagers represent only the beginning of a larger threat. Admiral Chen transmitted detailed intelligence about what she calls reality incursions. The main display shifted to show charts and data streams that hurt to look at directly. Zephyr recognized some of it from her briefing with Admiral Chen, but much of it seemed to be information that existed in dimensions her mind couldn't properly process. According to human intelligence, the Ravagers were scouts from outside our reality. They're fleeing something even worse. The next phase will involve entities called Advance Hunters, followed by Reality Shapers, and finally, Convergence entities. The Crystalline Collective's representative resonated with frequencies of terror. Reality Shapers? What does that mean? Beings capable of rewriting the fundamental laws of physics in localized areas. Gravity might reverse, time could flow backward, matter might exist in impossible states. Normal space becomes uninhabitable for baseline matter within 50 light-years of their presence. The Supreme Counselor's ancient voice carried new gravity. How does humanity know this? Admiral Nexus paused, seeming to wrestle with the magnitude of what he was about to reveal. They claim to have encountered this threat before in other galaxies. They've been preparing for its arrival here for 12,000 years. The number hung in the air like an accusation. 12,000 years ago, most species in the Council were barely achieving spaceflight. Some were still in their planetary stone ages. The humans had been fighting interdimensional entities while the rest of the galaxy was learning to build starships. Other galaxies? The Thrakari ambassador's voice was barely above a whisper. How many? Admiral Chen mentioned active contact with 47,000 sentient species across the local galactic cluster. She said they've been seriously exploring for 20,000 years. The chamber fell into stunned silence. The scope of what was being revealed was beyond the ability of most minds to process. Humanity hadn't just been hiding their capabilities. They'd been operating on a scale that made the Galactic Council look like children playing with toys. The Altarian ambassador spoke carefully. If this is true, if the humans possess such vast capabilities, why maintain the pretense? Why not reveal themselves as the dominant force they apparently are? According to Admiral Chen, they prefer to observe how species behave when they think they have advantages over others. It's been a test of our character. The implication was clear and deeply uncomfortable. Every moment of condescension toward the seemingly primitive humans, every dismissive comment about their simple technology, every assumption of superiority, it had all been catalogued and evaluated by beings capable of manipulating time and space. What do they want from us now? Asked the Valdorian Supreme Counselor. Admiral Nexus activated a new set of data displays. They're proposing to take primary responsibility for defending the local galactic cluster against the reality incursions. 12 galaxies total, approximately 400 billion star systems. The numbers were so vast they became meaningless. 400 billion star systems under the protection of a single species that most of the galaxy had considered barely worth acknowledging. They're requesting our assistance with evacuation protocols. When the reality shapers arrive, normal space within 50 light-years of their entry points becomes uninhabitable. Approximately 40 billion civilians will need to be relocated. The logistical nightmare of such an evacuation was staggering. Moving 40 billion people across interstellar distances would strain the combined resources of every council member species. How long do we have? The Supreme Counselor asked. 6 months before the advance hunters arrive. If humanity's response to them is sufficiently overwhelming, the threat might withdraw and seek easier targets elsewhere. The Crystalline Collective's representative resonated with what might have been hope. And if not? Then we face reality shapers followed by convergence entities whose arrival would effectively end this universe, as we know it. The chamber remained silent as delegates processed the magnitude of the threat and the even greater magnitude of humanity's proposed response. Finally, the Supreme Counselor spoke. This council has always prided itself on rational decision-making, based on careful evaluation of evidence. The evidence suggests that we are children who have wandered into an adult war. He paused, his ancient voice carrying the weight of civilizations. The question before us is simple. Do we trust the humans to protect us, or do we face annihilation through our own inadequacy? The vote, when it came, was unanimous. For the first time in the Council's history, every member species voted identically. They would trust humanity to save them all. What they didn't know was that humanity had been saving galaxies for longer than most of their civilizations had existed, and they were very, very good at it. 6 weeks after the advance hunters' defeat, reality itself began to fray at the edges of the galaxy. Commander Zephyr stood in the command center of humanity's primary defense station, watching displays that showed the fundamental laws of physics breaking down in real time. Stars aged billions of years in seconds. Planets existed and didn't exist simultaneously. Space-time itself was becoming unreliable. Reality shapers confirmed, Admiral Chen announced with grim satisfaction. 3 entities manifesting in sectors 12, 37, and 61. They're rewriting local physics to create suitable environments for themselves. On the tactical display, Zephyr could see the zones of altered reality spreading outward like cancer. Within those regions, matter behaved according to alien rules that hurt to contemplate. Gravity flowed in spirals. Time moved in loops. Energy existed as geometric shapes that sang in frequencies that could drive minds insane. How do we fight something like that? She asked, though she was beginning to understand that humanity's definition of impossible was more flexible than most species. Very carefully, Chen replied. Reality shapers exist partially in our universe and partially in the conceptual realm, where abstract ideas have physical form. Traditional weapons can't touch them because they can simply redefine what damage means in their local space. The human response began with what Chen called conceptual artillery. Weapons that didn't fire energy or matter but fired ideas. Mathematical proofs that certain types of existence were logically impossible. Philosophical arguments presented as ballistic trajectories. The concept of entropy weaponized and launched at faster than light speeds. Zephyr watched in fascination as the first reality shaper found its altered physics zone suddenly constrained by logical paradoxes. When it tried to make gravity flow in spirals, it encountered a mathematical proof that spiral gravity was self-contradictory. When it attempted to create matter that existed in 7 dimensions simultaneously, philosophical arguments about the nature of dimensional existence forced it back into normal space-time. "We're using their own abilities against them," Chen explained. "Reality shapers change physics by imposing their will on the fundamental forces. But they have to follow some kind of logical framework, even if it's alien logic. If we can introduce contradictions into their framework, their own power works to destroy them." The battle was unlike anything Zephyr had ever witnessed. It was fought in dimensions that didn't technically exist, using weapons forged from pure mathematics and shields made of crystallized philosophy. Human forces advanced through regions where cause and effect had been reversed, protected by equipment that existed in theoretical space rather than physical reality. The second reality shaper attempted a different approach. Instead of reshaping physics gradually, it tried to impose its will on an entire star system instantly. The result was catastrophic, but not in the way the entity intended. The human reality anchors throughout the system immediately activated, creating a feedback loop that forced the reality shaper to experience its own alterations multiplied exponentially. Zephyr watched through sensors that existed in 11 dimensions as the entity was caught in a cascade of its own power. Every change it made was reflected back at it with increasing intensity, until it was torn apart by the contradictions in its own existence. "That's 2 down," Chen observed with clinical satisfaction. "The third one is adapting, though. It's learning from the other's mistakes." The third reality shaper had withdrawn to the galaxy's edge, where it was methodically testing humanity's defenses. Instead of making dramatic changes, it introduced subtle alterations to local physics. A slight increase in the gravitational constant here, a minor change to the speed of light there. Each modification was small enough to avoid triggering the reality anchors, but collectively they would eventually make normal matter unstable. "Clever," Admiral Chen admitted. "It's trying to boil us slowly instead of flash frying us. We'll need to shift to active offensive operations." What followed was humanity's most impressive display yet. The UES Infinity, Admiral Chen's flagship, began to reconfigure itself in ways that defied description. Sections of the ship folded through dimensions that existed only in mathematical theory. The vessel became a hybrid of matter and abstract concept, existing simultaneously in normal space and the realm where ideas had physical form. "We're going into conceptual space to engage the reality shaper directly," Chen explained. "In that realm, the strength of an idea determines its physical properties. We'll be fighting with weaponized logic against an entity made of living impossibility." The transition into conceptual space was indescribable. Zephyr felt her consciousness expand across multiple layers of existence. She could see thoughts taking physical form, watch emotions flow like rivers of colored light, observe the mathematical structures that underlay reality itself. The reality shaper appeared as a vast crystalline entity composed of altered physical laws. It was beautiful and terrifying, a living demonstration that the universe was far more flexible than most beings realized. When it moved, space-time rippled around it like disturbed water. The human attack began with philosophical bombardment. They fired questions at the entity that challenged its fundamental assumptions about existence. What is the nature of consciousness? Can an entity that changes reality be certain of its own reality? If you alter the laws of physics, do you alter the meaning of alteration itself? Each question struck the reality shaper like a physical blow. Its crystalline form began to show fractures as it struggled to process paradoxes that threatened its conceptual foundation. But the entity adapted quickly. Instead of trying to answer the questions, it began reshaping the nature of questioning itself. It redefined logic to make the human paradoxes meaningless. It altered the concept of consciousness to render philosophical attacks ineffective. "Time for the heavy artillery," Chen announced. The UES Infinity deployed its most powerful weapon, absolute mathematics. These weren't just equations. They were mathematical truths so fundamental that they couldn't be altered regardless of local physics. 2 + 2 = 4. even in a universe where addition was redefined. A circle's circumference relates to its diameter by pi, regardless of how space itself was warped. The absolute mathematics struck the reality shaper like anchors of unchangeable truth. No matter how it tried to reshape reality around itself, certain mathematical relationships remained constant. It found itself constrained by principles that existed outside the realm of alterable physics. Now, Chen ordered. The Infinity fired its final weapon, the concept of limitation itself. They launched the idea that even reality shapers had boundaries, that infinite power was logically impossible, that omnipotence was self-contradictory. The reality shaper began to collapse as its own unlimited power became its weakness. Its ability to change anything included the ability to change its ability to change things. The paradox consumed it from within until it imploded into a point of crystallized logic that immediately dispersed into harmless mathematical relationships. Target neutralized, reported the tactical officer. Conceptual coherence reduced to baseline mathematical constants. As they transitioned back to normal space, Zephyr felt her expanded consciousness compress back into her familiar physical form. The experience left her fundamentally changed. She had seen the underlying mathematics of existence itself. Is that the end of it? She asked. Admiral Chen's expression was serious. That was just the prelude. The convergence entities are coming, and they don't just reshape reality, they merge different realities together. When they arrive, we'll be fighting for the right of our universe to continue existing as a separate entity. Zephyr looked at the displays showing the galaxy slowly returning to normal physics. Stars resumed their proper aging cycles. Planets solidified back into singular existence. Space-time regained its familiar properties. Somewhere beyond the galaxy's edge, she knew the convergence entities were preparing for an assault that would make everything they'd faced so far look trivial. But as she watched the human fleet reconfigure itself for the next phase of impossible warfare, she felt something remarkable. Hope. Humanity had just defeated entities that could rewrite the laws of physics. Whatever came next would discover that this galaxy was protected by a species that had made victory over impossibility their defining characteristic, the convergence. Entities were about to learn what it meant to threaten a universe under humanity's protection, and that lesson would be their last. The convergence entities didn't arrive. They simply began existing everywhere at once. One moment the galaxy was recovering from the reality shaper's assault. The next moment every point in space-time was simultaneously under attack by beings that existed in all possible universes, simultaneously. Commander Zephyr felt the assault as a fundamental wrongness in her perception of existence. Reality suddenly had too many layers, like looking at a photograph that showed 17 different scenes depending on the angle. Through the observation deck of humanity's command station, she could see her homeworld of Cathari Prime existing in multiple states, as it was now, as it had been before the Ravager attack, as it might have been if evolution had taken different paths, and as it could become in countless potential futures. Convergence entities confirmed across all dimensional matrices, Admiral Chen announced, her voice carrying the weight of ultimate crisis. They're attempting to collapse the dimensional barriers between parallel universes. If they succeed, every possible version of reality will exist simultaneously. The tactical displays showed readings that shouldn't have been possible. The entities weren't located in any specific place. They were the connection points between different versions of the universe. They existed in the spaces between possibilities, in the gaps where one reality ended and another began. What does that mean for us? Zephyr asked, though she suspected the answer would be apocalyptic. Complete collapse of causal existence, Chen replied grimly. Every decision that was ever made would exist alongside every decision that could have been made. Every being would exist in all their possible forms simultaneously. Consciousness itself would become impossible because awareness requires distinction between what is and what isn't. Through the impossible viewports, Zephyr could see the effects beginning to manifest. Stars existed as red giants and white dwarfs and main sequence suns all at the same time. Planets phased between their various evolutionary stages. Space itself became layered with infinite variations. How do we fight something that exists in all realities simultaneously? She asked. Admiral Chen smiled, and for the first time since Zephyr had known her, the expression was genuinely fierce. with the one thing that's constant across all possible universes: humanity's refusal to accept defeat. The human response began with something Chen called selective existence protocol. Instead of trying to fight the convergence entities directly, humanity started choosing which version of reality they wanted to maintain. They deployed devices that Zephyr's instruments couldn't properly analyze, machines that seemed to be made of crystallized decisions rather than matter. "We're anchoring our preferred timeline," Chen explained as the command station reconfigured itself around them. "Every human ship, every human installation, every human being is now broadcasting a signal that says, 'This is the reality we choose to maintain.'" The effect was immediate and profound. Around each human position, the multiple overlapping realities began to stabilize into single, coherent versions. The impossible multiplicity of existence was forced to resolve into the specific timeline that humanity had chosen to preserve. But the convergence entities adapted quickly. If humans could choose their reality, then the entities would prevent choice itself from existing. They began attacking the concept of decision-making, trying to eliminate the possibility of selecting one option over another. "Incoming temporal paradox storm," reported the tactical officer. "The entities are trying to make cause and effect simultaneous with all their alternatives." The assault hit like a wave of pure confusion. Zephyr found herself experiencing every possible conversation she could be having, every potential action she might take, every alternative thought she could think. For a terrifying moment, she existed as all possible versions of herself simultaneously. Then the human defensive systems activated, and the paradox resolved. The selective existence generators had protected the station's crew from the philosophical assault. "Phase 2, Admiral Chen announced. "Deploy the universe locks." What emerged from the human fleet defied every law of physics that had ever been proposed. The universe locks were devices that existed in the conceptual realm, where abstract ideas had concrete form. They were built from crystallized mathematical constants, powered by the logical necessity of their own existence, and armed with the absolute truth that reality must choose a single path. The convergence entities responded by trying to merge with the universe locks, attempting to make them exist in all possible states simultaneously. The battle that followed was fought in dimensions that had no names, using weapons forged from pure necessity and shields made of crystallized inevitability. Zephyr watched through sensors that existed in 17 different mathematical frameworks as humanity engaged the convergence entities in combat that transcended physical existence. The humans weren't just fighting for their galaxy. They were fighting for the right of singular reality to exist at all. "They're strong," Chen admitted as the battle intensified. "Convergence entities represent the ultimate expression of multiversal existence. They've consumed dozens of reality clusters before arriving here. What makes you think we can stop them?" Chen's smile became absolutely terrifying. "Because they've never encountered a species that weaponized stubbornness itself." The turning point came when humanity deployed their most impossible weapon yet, the concept of human nature itself. They launched the idea that humans always find a way, that humanity never accepts defeat, that human beings are fundamentally too stubborn to allow their universe to be destroyed. The convergence entities tried to absorb this concept, to make it exist in all possible states simultaneously. But human nature proved to be paradox-resistant. The idea that humans refused to lose remained constant across all possible realities. It was a universal absolute that couldn't be made relative. The entities found themselves constrained by this unchangeable truth. In every reality where they might have succeeded, human nature demanded that failure was unacceptable. The very concept of humanity's refusal to be defeated became a physical force that prevented the entities from achieving their goal. "Deploying final protocol," Chen announced. "Universal reset authorization confirmed." What happened next was humanity's ultimate demonstration of power. The entire human fleet, every installation, every piece of technology they had deployed, began to merge into a single meta-entity. Not the convergence that the entities had attempted, but a focused concentration of human will and human technology into something that existed beyond normal categories of existence. The merged human consciousness spoke with a voice that echoed across all possible realities. "This universe exists as a singular entity because we choose it to be so. The alternatives are rejected. The convergence is denied. Reality will maintain its proper form because humanity wills it to be so. The convergence entities made their final attempt, trying to merge with humanity itself, to make the human species exist in all their possible forms simultaneously, but they had made a fundamental error in understanding what humanity actually was. Humans weren't just another species that had evolved intelligence. They were a species that had evolved the ability to impose their will on reality itself. Every impossible human achievement, every moment when they had refused to accept natural limitations, every instance when they had made the universe conform to their desires rather than accepting what was possible, all of it had been preparation for this moment, the convergence. Entities found themselves facing not just human technology or human intelligence, but human nature itself weaponized into a force of cosmic proportions. They were confronted by a species that had spent their entire evolutionary history practicing for exactly this type of impossible victory. One by one, the convergence entities began to collapse. Their ability to exist in multiple realities simultaneously was overwhelmed by humanity's absolute insistence that only one reality had permission to exist. The dimensional barriers reformed, separating the infinite possibilities back into their proper categories. When it was over, the galaxy existed in a single stable timeline. The multiple overlapping versions of reality had been forced to resolve into the specific version that humanity had chosen to preserve. Stars resumed their normal life cycles. Planets settled into their proper evolutionary states. Space-time regained its familiar characteristics. Convergence entities neutralized, Admiral Chen reported with quiet satisfaction. Universal coherence restored. Reality stabilized across all dimensional matrices. Commander Zephyr looked around the command station, seeing it clearly for the first time since the assault began. Everything was exactly as it had been, yet somehow everything was different. She had witnessed the ultimate battle for existence itself, and humanity had won through the simple expedient of refusing to consider any alternative. "What happens now?" she asked. Admiral Chen smiled. "Now we continue doing what humanity has always done, protecting the galaxy from..." 3 months after the Council's unanimous vote, Commander Zephyr found herself aboard a human monitoring station, positioned at the edge of normal space-time. The structure defied every architectural principle she understood. It seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, its corridors extending in directions that had no names. Admiral Chen had invited her to observe the construction of humanity's defensive grid, and what Zephyr witnessed challenged her sanity on an hourly basis. Ships the size of moons moved through space like living things, deploying structures that existed partially in normal reality and partially in what the humans casually referred to as conceptual space. "The advance hunters will probe our defenses first," Admiral Chen explained as they stood in an observation chamber that somehow provided views of 17 different galaxies simultaneously. "They don't think in terms of conventional physics. To them, space and time are suggestions rather than laws." Through one of the impossible viewports, Zephyr watched human engineers installing what looked like crystalline flowers the size of space stations. Each one pulsed with energies that registered as probability fluctuations on her sensors. "What are those?" she asked. "Reality anchors. They maintain stable physics in localized areas when the laws of nature start getting creative. During a reality shaper attack, they'll be the only places where normal matter can exist safely." The scale of the defensive preparations was incomprehensible. Humanity was essentially rebuilding the fundamental structure of space-time itself, creating stable islands in what would soon become a sea of impossible physics. "Admiral," Zephyr said carefully, "the energy requirements for this construction must be enormous." "How are you powering it?" Chen smiled. "We harvest energy from quantum vacuum fluctuations. Empty space isn't really empty. It's full of potential energy waiting to be tapped. We've been using vacuum energy for about 15,000 years. 15,000 years of technology that made antimatter seem quaint." Zephyr was beginning to understand that humanity's casual mentions of vast timescales weren't exaggerations. They really had been advancing their civilization while the rest of the galaxy was still figuring out basic chemistry. There, Chen pointed to a section of space that seemed to shimmer with heat distortion. Construction Crew 17 just finished installing a causality stabilizer. It ensures that cause and effect maintain their proper relationship even when reality shapers try to reverse temporal flow. A causality stabilizer. They were building devices to prevent effect from preceding cause. The implications made Zephyr's head hurt. "How many species have you saved from threats like this?" she asked, directly. "About 12 million sentient species across 47 galaxies. Indirectly, by preventing reality incursions from spreading, probably closer to 100 million species. 100 million civilizations owed their existence to humanity's intervention, and most of them had never even known they were in danger. The humans had been fighting this war in the background of galactic history for eons, protecting species who thought themselves the pinnacle of creation." A soft chime indicated an incoming priority transmission. The holographic display showed a human woman Zephyr hadn't met before, her uniform bearing insignia that seemed to shift and change as she watched. "Admiral Chen, this is Commander Rodriguez at Deep Space Monitoring Station Omega. We're detecting probability fluctuations consistent with Advance Hunter arrival. Estimated time to manifestation, 72 hours, acknowledged. Initiate Protocol 7. All stations report readiness status." The display filled with responses from across the galaxy. Hundreds of human installations reported their status in rapid succession. Each one was a fortress capable of withstanding attacks from entities that existed outside normal physics. "Protocol 7? Zephyr asked. "Full combat readiness against non-causal entities. We seal all dimensional interfaces, activate temporal shielding, and prepare to engage targets that may attack us yesterday in order to prevent today from happening." The casual way Chen discussed paradoxical warfare was deeply unsettling. To the humans, fighting enemies who could attack through time was apparently routine. "Commander," another voice emerged from the communication system. "This is Colonel Martinez aboard the UES Infinity. We've completed deployment of the probability net around Cathari Prime. Local spacetime is now stable to 14 decimal places. 14 decimal places of temporal stability." Zephyr wasn't even sure what that meant, but it sounded reassuringly precise. Over the next 72 hours, Zephyr watched humanity's defense network activate. Ships that had been invisible suddenly became detectable as their stealth systems powered down. Space itself seemed to crystallize as reality anchors established stable zones of normal physics. The advance hunters arrived exactly when predicted, though "arrived" was perhaps the wrong term for entities that simply began existing in places they hadn't existed before. They appeared as geometric impossibilities, shapes that had too many angles, shadows that fell upward, structures that existed in the spaces between spaces. "Contact," Admiral Chen announced calmly. 17 advance hunters manifesting across grid sectors 7 through 43. Beginning engagement. The human response was immediate and overwhelming. Weapons that fired concepts rather than energy beams opened up on the impossible entities. Reality itself became weaponized as the humans deployed forces that existed in mathematical spaces rather than physical ones. Zephyr watched in amazement as the advance hunters found themselves unable to affect the human installations. Every attempt they made to alter local physics was instantly corrected by the reality anchors. When they tried to attack through time, temporal shielding deflected their assaults into parallel dimensions where they harmlessly dissipated. "They're testing our defenses systematically," Chen observed, "trying to find weaknesses in our reality stabilization grid." One of the advance hunters attempted to manifest directly inside the monitoring station. Zephyr felt reality flux around her, her perception of space and time becoming fluid. For a terrifying moment, she existed in 17 different dimensions simultaneously. Then the station's defensive systems activated, and the entity was expelled into what the tactical display labeled as conceptual null space. Reality snapped back to normal with an almost audible crack. "Well," Chen said cheerfully, "that was rude. Return fire authorized." What happened next defied description. The human counterattack wasn't directed at the advance hunter's physical form. It targeted the mathematical principles that allowed the entity to exist. Zephyr watched as the creature's impossible geometry began to collapse, its non-Euclidean angles straightening into normal space until there was nothing left but confused photons. "Target neutralized," reported the tactical officer. existential coherence reduced to zero. Across the galaxy, similar engagements played out. 17 advance hunters faced humanity's reality-warping defense network and found themselves completely outmatched. These entities that could reshape physics at will discovered that the humans had already reshaped physics more thoroughly than they could overcome. The entire engagement lasted 47 minutes. When it was over, the advance hunters had been completely eliminated, their exotic matter recycled into useful energy by human salvage systems. "Is that it?" Zephyr asked. "Are we safe?" Admiral Chen's expression became thoughtful. "For now, but the advance hunters were just the scouts for the scouts. They'll report back to the reality shapers that this galaxy is heavily defended." "Will the reality shapers retreat?" "Unknown. Reality shapers don't think the way normal entities do. They might decide we're interesting enough to warrant personal attention." The thought of beings more powerful than the advance hunters finding humanity interesting was terrifying. But as Zephyr watched the human defense grid recalibrate itself for the next phase of threats, she felt something she hadn't expected: confidence. The humans had been preparing for this war longer than most species had existed. They had turned the defense of reality itself into a routine military operation. Whatever came next, she realized, would discover that this galaxy was under the protection of a species that had made the impossible their specialty. And that was a mistake nothing had ever survived making twice.